"Don't you touch her." That was all he said. A homeless boy bleeding, barely standing, arms wrapped around a toddler he'd never met, planting his feet in the dirt like he had nothing left to lose. Because he didn't. 200 Hell's Angels rolled back into that desert town expecting a quiet night. Instead, they found a kid collapsed in the dust, shielding a child with the last breath in his broken body. Nobody knew his name yet, but every single one of those hardened men went silent. If this story moves you, subscribe and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The town of Maricopa sits about 35 miles south of Phoenix, the kind of place that gets hot enough in July to warp the asphalt and make the air above the road shimmer like a mirage. It's the kind of town where people drive through but rarely stop, where the gas stations have security cameras with cracked lenses and the motels charge by the week for people who've run out of better options. Most folks who live there know exactly who belongs and who doesn't. And for the better part of 4 months, everybody in Maricopa had decided that Ryan Hale, 18 years old, 5'10", 142 pounds of lean muscle and bad luck, did not belong. He slept behind the Blue Barrel Tavern on Monday nights because that was when Denny Cassis, the overnight cook, propped the kitchen door open with a brick to let the heat out, and sometimes not always. But sometimes there'd be a paper bag sitting near the dumpster with a wrapped sandwich inside and a small bottle of water. Ryan never knew for certain who left it. He had his suspicions, but he never asked because asking would have made it real, and if it was real, it could be taken away. That was rule number 1 in Ryan Hale's life: don't get attached to anything you can't carry. He'd learned that rule at 11 years old the morning he came downstairs to find his mother's car gone from the driveway and a note on the kitchen counter that said simply, "I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore." No signature, no forwarding address. Just those 6 words and the smell of her perfume fading in the air. His father, a man named Dale Hale, who worked the line at an auto parts warehouse and drank Pabst Blue Ribbon with the same dedication other men brought to religion, didn't take the news well. Not that he'd taken anything particularly well in the years before that either. But after Ryan's mother left, something in Dale Hale curdled. He stopped going to work. He stopped paying the electric bill. He stopped remembering most days that he had a son at all. By the time Ryan was 14, he knew how to stretch a single can of soup into 2 meals, how to sleep with one eye open, and how to read a room. The second he walked in, not for fun, not as some party trick, but because knowing the temperature of a room could mean the difference between a bad night and a night that left marks. By 16, he'd stopped going to school entirely. Not because he was stupid, he wasn't, not by a long shot, but because school required stability, and stability required a home, and a home required things Ryan had run out of. At 17, Dale Hale did the one useful thing of his adult life. He had a heart attack and died in the parking lot of a Walmart in Chandler, Arizona. Ryan didn't cry at the funeral. There were only 4 people there, including the pastor, and one of them was a woman from the county who'd shown up to make sure the paperwork was filed correctly. Ryan stood in the back and watched them lower the casket and felt mostly just tired. The foster system tried briefly. There was a family in Mesa, the Garcias, who were kind enough people genuinely, with a clean house and regular dinners and a dog named Biscuit who liked to sleep at the foot of Ryan's bed. But Ryan was 17 and traumatized and angry in the quiet, bone-deep way that scared people who didn't understand it. And by month 3, there were meetings with caseworkers and phone calls, and then finally a conversation at the kitchen table where everyone agreed that maybe a different placement would be better. There was no different placement. At 18, Ryan Hale aged out of the system with $40 in his pocket, a backpack with 2 changes of clothes, and a phone that would stop working in 11 days when the prepaid minutes ran out. He ended up in Maricopa almost by accident, hitched a ride with a trucker named Carl, who was going as far as the truck stop on Route 347, and when Carl asked where he was headed, Ryan had said with complete honesty, "Doesn't matter." And Carl had nodded like he understood, which maybe he did. The Blue Barrel Tavern was 3 blocks from the truck stop. Ryan noticed it because the lights were on late and there was music, real music. Not the canned stuff from a speaker, but someone playing a guitar. And he stood outside for a while just listening, because music was one of the few things left in the world that still felt like it belonged to everybody. The woman who ran the Blue Barrel was named Evelyn Donovan, 63 years old, white hair she kept pulled back tight, a face that had earned every line on it and wasn't apologizing for a single one. She had a way of looking at you that made you feel like she was reading your whole history, Not in a cold way, but in the way of someone who'd heard enough stories to know that most of them started the same place and ended somewhere complicated. Ryan had been standing outside for maybe 15 minutes when the back door opened and Evelyn leaned out. "You gonna stand there all night or you gonna come help me move these kegs?" she said. Ryan blinked. "I don't work here." "You will for the next 20 minutes, she said. "I'll give you dinner and a water." He moved the kegs. He got the dinner. He didn't see her again for 3 days. And when he came back around hunger making him bolder than good sense usually allowed, she was standing at the back door again like she'd been expecting him. "Trash cans need to go to the curb," she said. "Tuesday's pickup." He moved the trash cans. There was a sandwich and a Gatorade waiting when he finished. That was how it started. That was how it went for almost 4 months. No formal arrangement, no paperwork, no conversation about what it was or what it meant. Just Evelyn Donovan noticing things that needed doing and Ryan Hale doing them, and food appearing afterward with the quiet reliability of gravity. He never ate inside. She never invited him to. But sometimes when he was finishing up and the night was cooling down, she'd come to the back door with a cup of coffee and hand it to him, and she'd lean against the door frame and they'd talk. Not about big things, about small things, the weather, a story she'd heard on the radio, something funny a customer had said. Once she told him about a coyote she'd seen crossing the parking lot at 3 in the morning, moving like it owned the place, completely unbothered by the neon signs, or the diesel smell, or the entire concept of human civilization. "That's how you survive out here," she'd said, almost to herself. "You act like you belong everywhere, even when nothing belongs to you." Ryan had looked at her over his coffee cup and said, "Did you just compare me to a coyote?" And Evelyn Donovan had smiled a real smile, not the bar business kind, and said, "Maybe. Coyotes are smarter than people give them credit for." He thought about that a lot in the weeks after. Thought about it the way you think about something that lands differently than it was probably intended, that hits a part of you that didn't know it needed hitting. He didn't know anything about Evelyn's family. Not really. He knew she ran the bar and that she was respected in the way that serious people with serious histories are respected, not because they demand it, but because it occurs to nobody to do otherwise. He knew she had a son because she'd mentioned him once in passing, something about him being away for work. He knew she had a granddaughter because he'd seen the little girl exactly once, maybe 2 years old. White blonde hair, wearing a purple shirt with a ladybug on it, holding Evelyn's hand in the parking lot one Saturday afternoon while Evelyn loaded supplies from her truck. He hadn't thought much about it at the time. He thought about it later, in the dark, with blood on his hands and someone else's daughter pressed against his chest, her small fingers knotted in his shirt, her face buried in his shoulder. But that comes later. And the night it all went wrong started like most of Ryan's nights in Maricopa, quietly with hunger. He'd eaten nothing since the morning when he'd found half a breakfast burrito in a bag someone had left on top of a trash can outside the gas station. He'd checked it carefully. He'd learned to check carefully, and it was fine, still warm even, and he'd eaten it, crouched behind the station with his back to the wall and his eyes on the street because old habits. By 8 o'clock, his stomach was past the stage of active complaining and into the kind of hollow quiet that means your body has given up negotiating and started rationing. He knew that feeling well enough to know it made him slower. Slower meant less safe. Less safe in the wrong neighborhood on the wrong night could mean all kinds of things he'd spent 2 years getting very good at avoiding. He was thinking about the Blue Barrel, not about food. Evelyn hadn't signaled anything for the past few days. No eye contact when he'd passed the back of the building, which meant there was probably nothing tonight. But he found himself walking in that direction anyway, the way you sometimes walk toward the one place that feels the most like something even when you know better. He was 2 blocks away when he heard it. Not gunshots, not yet. What he heard first was an engine too loud and too fast for a neighborhood street, followed immediately by the sound of glass breaking and a woman screaming. Short and sharp, the kind of scream that gets cut off by something which was worse than one that kept going. Ryan stopped walking. Every sensible instinct he had, and he had good instincts, had spent years sharpening them the way other kids sharpen pencils, said the same thing clearly and without ambiguity. Turn around. Walk the other way. This is not your problem, and you are not equipped to make it your problem. He stood there for approximately 4 seconds. Then he started running toward the sound. He couldn't explain it, not in any rational way. Not then, not later when people asked. The best he ever managed was something like, "She didn't forget me, so I couldn't just leave," which sounds simple when you say it like that. But it wasn't simple. It was the most complicated thing he'd ever done because he absolutely knew what he was running into. He wasn't some action hero with a plan and training and a weapon. He was 142 pounds of malnutrition and bad history, and whatever was happening at the Blue Barrel Tavern was happening with engines and broken glass and a scream that got cut off. He ran anyway. He came around the corner of the alley behind the bar and had to press himself flat against the wall fast because there were three vehicles he didn't recognize, two SUVs and a pickup parked at sharp angles that told you immediately they hadn't parked so much as stopped. Doors left open, engines still running. The parking lot lights were out, which wasn't normal. He could hear voices inside the bar, loud male, the kind of loud that isn't a conversation, it's a demonstration. He could hear something else too. Underneath the voices, smaller, higher, a child crying. His brain did something in that moment that he wouldn't understand until much later, when a therapist in a VA-adjacent clinic outside Tucson explained it to him, using words like threat assessment and hypervigilance response, an adaptive survival mechanism, which were fancy ways of saying that Ryan Hale's abused and street-trained mind had been running threat calculations his entire life, and in the absence of anything else to do with all that hardwired alertness, it had become extremely good at them. He counted the men he could see two outside near the vehicles, both armed. Handguns holstered, which meant they weren't in active engagement, which meant they were posted as lookouts. He counted the exits. He could see back door to the kitchen, propped open. The same brick, always the same brick, and the narrow window above the prep station that Denny always bitched about because it didn't seal properly in the summer. He counted what he had, one broken piece of wooden pallet he'd nearly tripped over in the dark, roughly 18 inches long. His own two hands? 4 months of watching how the Blue Barrel's back hallway connected to the main bar, because when you sleep near a place long enough, you learn its layout the way you learn a language, without trying to adjust through proximity. He waited. The lookout on the left shifted, angling away to check the front of the building. Ryan moved. He went through the back door, fast and low and quiet, being the most important variable. More important than fast, and he was in the kitchen before the door finished its backward swing. The kitchen was empty. The lights were off, but the pilot lights on the stove threw just enough blue-orange glow to see by. He heard the voices clearly now from the main bar. 3 men, maybe 4, speaking in a register that was past anger and into threat fulfillment, which was different. Angrier men talk more. Men who've already decided what they're going to do get quieter and more specific. Just tell us where it is, and this gets simple. Nobody's coming for you, Evelyn. Your son's not here. Nobody's. Last time I'm asking. And Evelyn's voice, steady, Ryan noted, was something that was almost disbelief. Steady in a way that made his chest hurt, saying, "I don't know what you're talking about, and I want you to leave my establishment." "Lady," a different voice closer, "you don't seem to understand what kind of night this is." "I understand exactly what kind of night this is," Evelyn said. "You are making a mistake, and the men who own this bar are going to know them." Brief silence. Then laughter. Not warm laughter. Ryan was at the kitchen door looking through the small porthole window into the main bar, and he was cataloging fast 4 men, visible Evelyn behind the bar, with her hands on the counter, not raised, not surrendered, just resting there, like she was waiting for something. And in the far corner near the booth by the emergency exit, a small figure curled up on the seat. The toddler. Blonde, ladybug shirt. Pressing herself into the corner of the booth with her knees drawn up and her face buried in her arms, making the small, desperate sounds that very young children make when they're past the point of crying out loud and have gone somewhere internal. Ryan looked at the child, he looked at the 4 men, he looked at the piece of wooden pallet in his hand. And then, because nothing about this night was going to make sense anyway, he pushed through the kitchen door. "Good crowd." "Hey!" 4 men turned in. Ryan had exactly one advantage in that moment. He looked so completely wrong for the situation, young, underfed, holding a broken piece of wood, wearing a shirt with a tear in the shoulder, that for approximately 2 full seconds, nobody knew how to react to him. That 2 seconds mattered. He didn't go for the men, he went for the child. Fast, straight line, no hesitation, because hesitation was death, and he'd made his calculation in the kitchen. And it was this: you can't fight four-armed men. You cannot win that fight, but you can change what the fight is about. He grabbed the little girl off the booth seat. She was rigid with terror, and then suddenly, not suddenly, grabbing at him with both hands, like she'd been waiting for exactly this, and he spun toward the emergency exit. Stop him! The emergency exit bar hit his forearm as he shouldered through it, alarm, shrieking, and then he was outside and running, and the girl's face was pressed into the side of his neck, and she was making a sound that wasn't crying and wasn't words, but was somehow both. And behind him, he could hear the exit banging open again and boots on gravel and someone shouting. Ryan Hale ran. He ran into the dark, away from the lights, away from the vehicles, away from every sensible direction. Because sensible directions were where they'd expect him, and expectation was the only thing he absolutely could not afford. He ran toward the desert, and the desert, indifferent and vast and completely unbothered by the drama of human violence, swallowed him whole. He didn't know how long he ran. Time does strange things when your body is running on adrenaline and empty. In fear, it compresses and stretches simultaneously so that 30 seconds can feel like a year and 20 minutes can vanish like smoke. He knew the vehicles had come after him. He'd seen the headlights swinging wide across the scrubland. He'd gone low behind a dry wash, then east along the wash until it curved back north, using the darkness the way Evelyn had described the coyote using it, acting like he belonged. The little girl didn't make a sound. That scared him more than the shouting. Children that young should be crying. The fact that she wasn't meant, she'd gone somewhere else, somewhere inside where the noise couldn't reach her. And that was the kind of quiet that adults talked about in hospital waiting rooms, not the good kind. Hey. He was breathing hard, ducked behind a rock formation, watching the sweep of headlights 200 yards to his east. He looked down at her face. Hey, you still with me? She looked up at him, dark eyes wide, impossibly wide, in a face that was all cheekbones and tear tracks and dry desert dust. Yeah, he breathed. Okay, me too. We're okay. He wasn't sure either of those things was true. His left side was hurting in a way that told him he'd taken a hit at some point, without properly registering it in the scramble through the bar maybe, or the exit door. He wasn't sure. He pressed his hand there and his fingers came away dark, and he looked at them for a moment and then looked away because there was nothing useful he could do about it, and processing it would only cost him what he needed for other things. The headlights swung south, away. He waited 5 minutes, counted seconds in Mississippi too. Mississippi because his phone had been dead for a week and he had no other way to measure it. Then he stood up. The little girl tightened her arms around his neck. We're moving, he told her like she was a full partner in the decision, which felt right somehow. We're going to move back toward the road. There's a gas station on 347. There'll be people there. She made a small sound. He chose to interpret it as agreement. He started walking. Boing. He made it maybe a mile and a half before he heard the engines again. Not the same engines, more of them. Different, lower, heavier, a sound that wasn't just one vehicle, wasn't two, wasn't 10. A sound that was more like weather than traffic rolling in from the north, getting louder in the way that meant distance collapsing between you and it fast. Ryan looked at the road ahead. Headlights coming from the north. Headlights behind him, the SUVs back again, finding the road. He was between them. He looked down at the toddler in his arms. She was looking at the oncoming lights with an expression he couldn't read and didn't have the reserves to try by him. He thought about the 6 words on a kitchen counter when he was 11 years old. He thought about the paper bag by the dumpster. He thought about Evelyn Donovan's voice steady in a bar full of men who'd decided what kind of night it was. He turned around. He put himself between the SUVs closing from the south and the child in his arms. He planted his feet in the desert dirt. He had exactly nothing left, no weapon, no plan, no second option. He had 2 arms wrapped around someone else's child, and he had the particular kind of tired that lives below exhaustion, below the place where your body keeps score down, where something older and simpler than logic makes its last few decisions. The headlights from the north kept coming. They were very loud now. The ground was shaking. Ryan Hale looked over his shoulder at the lights from the north, 200 of them. It would turn out, though, he didn't know that yet, and he thought with the last clear thought he would have for a while, I hope that's the good kind. Then his knees gave out. He went down slowly the way you go down when you've been fighting it for a long time and your body finally stops listening to your reasons. He kept his arms around the child, kept her off the ground, turned so he was facing the SUVs, facing south, the child against his chest, his back to the oncoming thunder from the north. He didn't let go. He did not let go. The engines from the north got louder. Then they stopped. And in the sudden absolute silence that followed, a silence so complete it felt like something physical. Like pressure, Ryan heard a sound he would remember for the rest of his life. 200 engines idling, and then nothing. And then boots on gravel, one pair walking toward him slowly. And then a man's voice, low, rough, the voice of someone who'd spent 60 years deciding what things meant before he spoke about them, saying, son. Just that one word. Ryan Hale, 18 years old, 142 pounds, bleeding in the desert dirt, with someone else's baby pressed against his heart, looked up and passed out. Marcus Steele Donovan had not knelt in the dirt in 31 years. The last time was at his wife Patricia's graveside in a cemetery outside Tucson on a Tuesday afternoon in October, when the sky was the kind of pale gray that makes everything look like it happened a long time ago. He'd knelt then because his legs had simply stopped working, not from grief exactly, but from the specific physical shock of realizing that a person who had held the center of your world together for 34 years was no longer in it, and that the world was going to keep spinning anyway, indifferent and relentless, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing you could do about that. He knelt now for different reasons. His knees hit the gravel, and he barely felt it. He was looking at the boy, this kid who couldn't weigh more than 140, soaking wet, crumpled in the desert dirt, with his arms still locked around Lily. Still locked, even unconscious, even with blood soaking through the left side of his shirt, in the slow, dark way that meant it had been going on for a while. Even with his face slack and his breathing shallow and every physical indicator pointing toward a body that had gone past its limit and kept going anyway. Even now, his arms did not let go. Marcus reached out and put one hand on the boy's shoulder. Then he looked up. "Get me Tomas," he said. "Now." Nobody argued with Marcus Donovan. Not in 30 years of riding, not in 20 years of leading, not on his best days or his worst. But in the silence that followed that order, he heard something he hadn't heard from his men in longer than he could remember. None of them moved right away. They were all just standing there, 200 of them, in a half circle that had formed without anyone directing it, and they were all looking at the same thing he was looking at. It was Hector Ruiz, 44 years old, 6'3", served 8 years in Leavenworth, and came out harder than he went in, who broke first. And what Hector Ruiz did, Marcus would never quite be able to explain to anyone who hadn't been there. Hector didn't reach for his phone. Hector didn't call out for Tomas. Hector Ruiz, who had not cried at his own mother's funeral because he said it wasn't the right place, turned away from the group and pressed the back of his hand against his mouth and stood there for a moment, shoulders shaking, and then composed himself and pulled out his phone. That was the first thing Marcus understood about what this boy had done. He'd broken something open in people who'd spent their whole lives making sure nothing could. Tomas Reyes was their medic, not a licensed physician, but a man who'd done 2 tours in Fallujah and had the kind of field medicine knowledge that gets developed in places where waiting for an ambulance is not a realistic option. He pushed through the circle and knelt on the other side of the boy and opened the kit he always carried on his bike with the matter-of-fact speed of someone whose hands knew the job before his brain caught up. "How long's he been down?" Thomas asked. "Don't know," Marcus said. "We just found him." Tomas cut the shirt, looked at the wound. His jaw tightened just slightly, just for a second, and Marcus caught it. "Tomas!" "He's been bleeding for a while," Tomas said in the careful tone of someone choosing words for maximum accuracy and minimum panic. "Knife, not a bullet. Deep. He's gonna need a hospital." "I know he needs a hospital. Is he going to make it to one?" Tomas looked at the boy's face, looked at the way his arms were still curved around Lily even now, even with his body completely offline. "Yeah," Tomas said, and his voice did something complicated. "Yeah, he'll make it. Kid's stubborn. You can tell." "How can you tell?" Tomas pressed gauze against the wound and leaned on it and looked at Marcus with an expression that was tired and something else, something older. "Because he's still holding her," he said. "Man's body gives up. The arms are the first thing to go. His didn't." Marcus looked at the boy's arms. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then Lily moved. She'd been pressed against the boy's chest face down, that same terrible silence that had scared Ryan without him being able to say why. But now with the circle of men around her and the engines idling and the specific smell of her grandfather engine oil and cigarettes and something underneath both that was just Marcus, reaching her through all the noise, she lifted her head. She looked at Marcus. "Pop, Pop," she said. Her voice was almost nothing. A thread. Marcus Donovan's throat closed. He reached out and picked her up carefully, watching the boy's arms rather than his own hands, making sure the transfer didn't jar the wound. And Lily came to him like water, finding low ground immediate in total, her face buried in his neck, her small hands fisting in the collar of his cut. But even as he held her, even as his granddaughter pressed herself against him, with the whole desperate weight of a 2-year-old who has been terrified and is now not Marcus, kept his eyes on the boy. "Who is he?" he asked. Not to anyone in particular, just to the air, to the night, to whoever had an answer. Nobody did. Not then. Ishting. They loaded Ryan into the back of Danny Ortiz's pickup. Danny was 6'5" and had a truck with a flat bed and had immediately, without being asked, cleared it of everything and lined it with his riding jacket. And Tomas rode in the back with him, keeping pressure on the wound while Marcus followed in the front seat with Lily asleep against his shoulder before they'd even reached the highway. She fell asleep fast, the way young children do when the crisis has passed, and the body reclaims what it's owed. Not because things were fine, but because she was 2 years old, and she had been running on terror for hours, and her grandfather was warm and solid and smelled right, and that was enough for her nervous system to declare an emergency shutdown. Marcus held her and looked at the road and said nothing. It was Bobby Vance who finally spoke. Bobby was Marcus's oldest road brother. They'd been riding together since 1987, and Bobby had the particular license of a man who'd seen you at your worst and stayed anyway. "You know her, right?" Bobby said from the driver's seat. "The kid, Evelyn, feeds him." Marcus turned his head. "What?" "I've seen him behind the bar. He does stuff for Mama Eve Hall's kegs, moves things. She leaves food for him." Bobby shrugged, watching the road. "Been going on maybe 4 months. I figured you knew." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "She never mentioned him." "She never mentions a lot of things she does for people," Bobby said. "You know how she is." Marcus did know how she was, Evelyn Donovan. His mother, 73 now, though she looked 60 and moved like 55, had been doing quiet things for people her entire life, accumulating nothing except the loyalty of everyone who'd ever received one of those quiet things and understood what it cost. She'd never talked about it because talking about it would have made it something other than what it was, which was just the way she moved through the world, leaving small dignities behind her like a trail. That this homeless kid had been one of those people that she'd seen him, fed him, made room for him in whatever small way she could, hit Marcus somewhere he wasn't prepared for. Not because it surprised him, because it didn't. He didn't know who she was, Marcus said. Not a question, a realization arriving in real time. He didn't know what she was connected to. He thought she was just a woman who ran a bar. "Yeah," Bobby said. "So when he went back in, he went back for her," Bobby said. "Not for us, not because of who we are, just because she'd been decent to him." The truck was quiet. The highway was dark outside, and the lights of the other riders stretched behind them in a line that went all the way back to the horizon, and Marcus watched that line in the side mirror and thought about what it meant that 200 men who had spent their lives operating by rules that had nothing to do with kindness were all right now following a boy they'd never met to a hospital in the middle of the night. "Bobby," he said. "Yeah, when we figure out who his people are." He stopped, reconsidered. "If he has people." Bobby drove for a moment. "And if he doesn't?" Marcus looked at Lily sleeping against his shoulder, looked at the highway, looked at his own hands, scarred, tattooed, 61 years old, tired in a way that had nothing to do with the ride. "Then we're his people," Marcus said. Bobby nodded once, like that was already obvious, like he'd just been waiting for Marcus to say the part out loud. The emergency room at Maricopa Regional was a Thursday night operation. 2 nurses, 1 attending physician, a waiting room with flickering lights, and 3 other patients who all looked up in collective alarm when the doors opened and 14 Hell's Angels walked in, because that was how many could fit before the head nurse, A woman named Sandra Poole, who had worked at ER for 19 years and had the energy of someone who had definitively run out of things that surprised her, came out from behind the desk and held up one hand. "One," she said. "I'll take medical information from one person. The rest of you can wait outside." There was a silence. Marcus stepped forward. Sandra Poole looked at him, cut the tattoos, the full beard, the scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw, the general unmistakable impression of a man who had not spent his life in comfortable rooms and did not blink. "Name of the patient," she asked. "Ryan Hale," Marcus said, then stopped. I believe that's his name. I don't have ID for him." Sandra looked at Marcus over her reading glasses. "Relationship." Marcus opened his mouth, closed it. Something moved across his face, not uncertainty exactly, but something getting cleared away to make room for something else. "Family," he said. Sandra Poole wrote it down without comment, which was in its own way the kindest thing anyone did for Ryan Hale that night, because it meant no one questioned it. It went into the system. It became, in the small, bureaucratic way that institutions make things real a fact. "The child," Sandra asked, nodding toward Lily, who had woken during the transfer from the truck and was now sitting on Marcus's arm with the watchful, serious expression of a toddler who has decided to assess her surroundings before committing to any particular emotional response. "My granddaughter," Marcus said. "She needs to be checked." "She wasn't hurt. I don't think she was hurt, but she was with him for several hours and she's been—" He paused. "She's been through something." Sandra came around the desk and crouched down to Lily's eye level and said in a voice completely unlike her desk, voice softer, almost musical, "Hi, sweetheart. Can you tell me your name?" Lily looked at her for a long moment. Then she said very clearly, "Ryan." Nobody in that waiting room said a word. Marcus looked at his granddaughter. Then he looked at the ceiling. Then he pressed his lips together very hard and breathed through his nose for a count of about 5. "Her name's Lily," he said, and his voice only fractured on the last syllable, just slightly, just enough. Sandra Poole stood up. She looked at Marcus with an expression that was professional and underneath that human. "We'll take good care of him," she said. "I know you will," Marcus said. And then, because he was Marcus Donovan, and he had not spent 61 years keeping his interior weather inside by being sloppy about it, "Thank you." Evelyn arrived 40 minutes later. She walked into the waiting room under her own power, which was itself remarkable because 40 minutes earlier, she'd been behind the bar of the Blue Barrel with 4 armed men, and she had the bruise along her jaw and the cut above her right eyebrow to show for it. She'd refused the ambulance her son Michael, who'd arrived at the bar 12 minutes after the situation resolved. In the way situations resolve when 200 Hell's Angels come back to town, had tried to insist, and she had said in the voice that ended arguments, "I'm going to the hospital to find out about the boy Michael. You can drive me or get out of my way." Michael had driven her. She walked in and stopped in the middle of the waiting room, and for a moment she just looked at the men standing and sitting and leaning against walls, the lineup of black cuts and road leather and hard faces arranged in rows through the waiting room and out into the parking lot beyond the glass doors, and something happened in her expression that was too complex to name. Not surprise, not exactly. More like recognition. Like the world had rearranged itself into a shape she'd understood was possible, but hadn't let herself believe in. Marcus stood up when he saw her. They looked at each other across the waiting room. "Mama," he said, just the one word. Evelyn Donovan crossed the room and put both hands on her son's face, reached up and held his face in her hands the way she'd done when he was 7 years old and came home with a split lip from a schoolyard fight. The same gesture, the same hands, just older now. And she said, "Is he alive?" "Yes." "Is he going to be all right?" "They think so." She dropped her hands, exhaled, the sound of a woman who has been holding her breath for the better part of an hour, finally carefully letting go. Then she sat down in the nearest chair like her legs had voted on it without consulting her, and Marcus sat next to her, and Lily climbed across from Marcus's lap to Evelyn's with the decisive territorial energy of a toddler who has made a preference known. Evelyn wrapped both arms around Lily and looked straight ahead. "He came back for us," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "He knew what was in there." "Yes." "And he had nothing. He had—" She stopped. Her jaw tightened. The bruise along her jaw had deepened to purple in the fluorescent light. Marcus, that boy, had nothing. He'd had nothing his entire life. He had no reason to come back for us. "He had one reason," Marcus said. Evelyn looked at him. You, Marcus said. You showed up for him, so he showed up for you. Evelyn Donovan, who had survived the deaths of two brothers and a husband, and the particular sustained grief of watching her son build a life that was always half one step from ruin, who had rebuilt the Blue Barrel from a failing dive into something that was quietly the center of gravity for an entire community, who had done hard things with grace for 63 years and intended to keep doing them, put her face in Lily's hair and cried. Not loudly, not the kind that asks for attention, the quiet kind, the kind that comes out when you've been strong for exactly as long as was necessary, and the necessity has just passed and your body is presenting its invoice. Marcus put his arm around her. He didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. The doctor came out an hour and 20 minutes later. His name was Dr. Philip Reeves, mid-40s, calm in the practiced way of ER physicians who've learned that their affect is contagious and they should choose it carefully. And he stopped at the entrance to the waiting room and registered with visible, if controlled surprise, the number of people who stood up simultaneously. He looked at Marcus. You're listed as family? Yes. Dr. Reeves nodded. He's stable. The wound was deep intercostal, meaning between the ribs, and he'd lost significant blood. He also has 2 cracked ribs, a hairline fracture in his left wrist, and signs of severe dehydration and malnutrition that predate tonight by weeks. He paused. Let that land. He's been in bad shape for a while. His body didn't have a lot in reserve when he needed it tonight. The waiting room was completely silent. But he's stable, Marcus said. He's stable. He's going to need rest and time and proper nutrition and follow-up. But yes, he's going to be okay. The exhale that moved through 200 men in that moment, through the waiting room, through the parking lot, visible through the glass doors, was the kind of thing you couldn't manufacture. It was involuntary, collective. The sound of people who had not realized how hard they were holding something finally being told they could put it down. Hector Ruiz in the parking lot sat down on the curb. Bobby Vance put his hand over his eyes. 2 men Marcus didn't see clearly embraced each other, the brief, rough embrace of men who needed to and wouldn't acknowledge it afterward. Marcus thanked Dr. Reeves and turned back to his mother. Evelyn was already looking at him. I want to see him, she said. Mama, he's Marcus. Her voice was quiet. I want to see him. He didn't argue. Dread. Ryan woke up to white ceiling and the smell of antiseptic and the very specific disorientation of a body that has been unconscious long enough to lose the thread of where it was last going. His first coherent thought was about Lily. He sat up or tried to and immediately discovered that his ribs had opinions about that loud and non-negotiable, and he made a sound that was not dignified and felt himself caught by a hand on his shoulder pressing him back down. Easy, said a voice. He blinked, focused. A woman, white hair, a bruise along her jaw that made something cold move through his chest. Sit down, Evelyn Donovan said. You've got a tube in your arm and you're about to pull it out. Ryan looked at his arm. IV line, Celine. He looked back at Evelyn. Lily, he said. His voice came out wrong, dry, cracked at the edges. Lily is fine, Evelyn said. She's with my son. She's been checked out. She's fine, Ryan. He said her name for the first time. Evelyn registered that he knew her name, that she was not anonymous to him, that he had done what he did for a person, not an abstraction, and something in her face shifted. Are you in pain, she asked. Oh, he said, which was the understatement of his 18-year life. Your face, he reached up, without thinking, stopped himself. Are you okay? Evelyn looked at this boy who had cracked ribs and a knife wound and hadn't eaten a real meal in days, and whose first question upon regaining consciousness was whether she was okay. And she reached out and took his hand. Not a dramatic gesture, just took his hand the way you take the hand of someone who needs to understand that they are not alone without being able to hear the words yet. I'm fine, she said. Ryan exhaled. They came after you because of... He stopped. I didn't know about your family. I didn't know who you were connected to. You're the one who left the food. You're the one who... He stopped again, looked at the ceiling. I just didn't want to leave you. Evelyn squeezed his hand. I know, she said. I didn't have a plan, he said. And there was something almost like an apology in it, the apology of someone who thinks a plan should have been available and is sorry it wasn't. Ryan, she waited until he looked at her. You got her out. You kept her safe. You brought her home. Her voice didn't break, but it was close. It was so close. You don't need a plan to be a hero. You just need to decide that someone else matters more than your own fear. Ryan stared at her. Then for the first time since he was approximately 11 years old, Ryan Hale cried. Not loud, not ugly, just quiet, steady tears that he didn't wipe away fast enough to hide them. And Evelyn Donovan held his hand through all of it and did not look away, did not make it smaller, did not rush him toward the other side of it. She just stayed, which was in the end the only thing he had ever needed from anyone. Marcus came in 10 minutes later and stood in the doorway and looked at the boy in the bed and awake. Now eyes red-rimmed but steady, and Ryan looked back at him, and the recognition between them was immediate and layered the recognition of two people who have already, without meaning to, sorted each other out. Marcus pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down. Marcus Donovan, he said. Ryan Hale, Ryan said. Marcus nodded, looked at his hands, then back at Ryan. You saved my granddaughter, he said. Ryan said nothing. I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, Marcus said. Did you know when you went back in that bar, did you know there was a chance you weren't walking out? Ryan thought about it, really thought about it. Not the polished version, but the actual moment in the kitchen with the broken pallet in his hand and four men's voices on the other side of the door. Yeah, he said, I knew. And you went anyway. She left food for me, Ryan said. Simple, direct. When nobody else saw me, she left food. Oh, he looked at Marcus. That's worth going back for. Marcus Donovan, who had negotiated with police departments and rival clubs and federal investigators, who had stared down men with guns and men with badges and men with both and flinched for none of them, sat with that for a long moment. Then he leaned forward. You got people, he asked. Family anywhere. Ryan shook his head. Anyone at all. Ryan looked at him for a moment. Something crossed his face, the careful guardedness of someone who has learned that hope is a limited resource and should not be spent recklessly. No, he said, not really. Marcus Donovan was quiet. He looked at his mother standing at the foot of the bed. He looked at the boy. He looked at his own hands one more time. Then he said it. You do now. Ryan didn't say anything. Outside in the parking lot, 200 men were still waiting, not leaving, not restless, just waiting the way people wait when they've decided that where they are is where they're supposed to be. Ryan Hale, 18 years old, looked at the man across from him and did not know what to do with what he was feeling because no one had ever given him the map for this specific territory. But his hands had stopped shaking, and that was something. That was, in fact, everything. The night Ryan Hale said, you do now, back to Marcus Donovan, or rather the night Marcus said it to him, and Ryan sat with it like a man trying to hold water in cupped hands, terrified of spilling it. That was not the end of anything. It was in the specific and unforgiving way of real life, the beginning of something much harder. Because being told you belong somewhere and actually believing it are two entirely different problems. And Ryan Hale had 18 years of evidence stacked against the second one. He stayed in the hospital for 4 days. Tomas came every morning not as a medic, but as a man who had decided to show up, and he'd sit in the chair beside the bed and talk about nothing important, mostly about rides and road stories, and the time Bobby Vance got a flat tire outside Albuquerque and tried to fix it with duct tape and conviction, which worked for approximately 6 miles. Ryan listened and said little and ate everything the hospital put in front of him, which the nurses noted with the careful approval of people who understood that a body eating that urgently had been without for a long time. On the second day, Lily came. Michael brought her Marcus's son, Evelyn's grandson, a broad-shouldered man in his late 30s, who had his mother's eyes and his father's jaw and the particular careful energy of someone managing a complicated family portfolio. He stood in the doorway holding Lily on his hip and said, she wouldn't stop asking about you. I thought it might be good for her to see you were okay. He paused. If that's all right. Ryan looked at Lily. Lily looked at Ryan. Then she held both arms out toward him with the absolute sovereign confidence of a 2-year-old who has decided what she wants and sees no reason why the universe should disagree. Michael set her on the edge of the hospital bed. She immediately put both hands on Ryan's face the way Evelyn had held Marcus's face, that same gesture, generational, and examined him with complete seriousness, like a doctor conducting her own assessment. Owie, she said, pointing at the bandaging visible above his hospital gown. Yeah, Ryan said. His voice came out rough. Owie. She nodded, processing this. Then she patted his cheek twice firmly with the decisive energy of someone delivering a verdict. Michael Donovan turned toward the window for a moment. When he turned back, he said, "My daughter doesn't take to people. She's cautious, has been since she started walking." He looked at Ryan directly. "She's been saying your name since she woke up yesterday morning, just randomly in the middle of other things, like it was on her mind." Ryan didn't say anything. "I want you to know," Michael said, "that whatever my father said to you, whatever he offered, he means it. My father doesn't say things he doesn't mean. It's one of the few absolute rules of his life." "I know," Ryan said, and then surprising himself, "Your grandmother is the same way." Michael nodded. "Yeah, he learned it from her." Marcus came alone on the third day. No entourage, no road brothers waiting in the hall. He pulled a chair close to the bed and sat with his elbows on his knees and said, "I want to know about you, not the story of last Thursday, before that. All of it, if you're willing." Ryan looked at him. Nobody had ever asked that in quite that way. Not casually, most people who'd known his history had received it through caseworkers and intake forms and the obligatory disclosures of institutional systems. Nobody had ever just pulled up a chair and said all of it, if you're willing. "Why were I?" Ryan asked. Marcus considered the question seriously, which Ryan noted and appreciated. "Because you made a decision about what my family was worth to you before you had any information about what we could do for you. That's a rare thing, and I want to understand the person who made it." Ryan looked at the IV line in his arm, looked at the ceiling, and then haltingly at first, and then with gathering momentum, like something that had been held at pressure for a long time, finding the first small crack, he talked. He told Marcus about his mother leaving, about his father, about the foster system, and the Garcias, and the way he'd aged out at 18 with $40 and no roadmap. He told it plainly, without the self-pity that makes people uncomfortable, and without the forced toughness that makes them skeptical. He told it the way you tell things when you're tired of performing around them. Marcus listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't make sympathetic sounds or head movements. He just listened with the full physical attention of a man who has decided that what he's hearing is important and wants to receive all of it. When Ryan finished, Marcus was quiet for a while. Then he said, "I did 2 years in Yuma Correctional when I was 24, armed robbery. I went in thinking I was the kind of man who could handle anything, and I came out knowing I was the kind of man who needed people around him or he would make choices that ended things." He looked at Ryan. "My mother was the person who didn't give up on me while I was inside. Drove 4 hours every visiting Sunday for 2 years. Brought food she'd cooked herself because she said the vending machine stuff would kill me faster than prison would." He almost smiled. "She was right. She's always right. It's exhausting." Ryan looked at him. "What I'm saying," Marcus said, "is that I know what it is to be a person who got the wrong start and had to figure out the rest on his own. I also know what it is to be handed something, a community, a structure, people who will show up and to spend years deciding whether you deserve it." He leaned forward. "You do. I'm telling you that clearly as a man who has been in your exact position and knows what the voice sounds like that tells you otherwise. It's lying to you." The room was quiet. Ryan's jaw was tight. "I don't need charity," he said, "not defensive, just honest." "Good," Marcus said immediately, "because I'm not offering it. Charity is for people you feel sorry for. I don't feel sorry for you. I respect you. Those are not the same transaction." Ryan looked at him for a long moment. "What are you actually offering?" he asked. Marcus sat back. "A place to live. Work, real work with wages. And people who will treat you like a person, not a project." He paused. "The rest of it, what it becomes, what you make of it, that's yours. I don't buy people. I invest in them. There's a difference." Ryan said nothing for a moment. Then, "What if I'm not what you think I am? What if last Thursday what if I just got lucky and panicked, and it came out right?" Marcus looked at him steadily. "If that were true," he said, "your arms would have let go." He was discharged on the 4th day with a prescription he couldn't fill, discharge instructions he couldn't follow without a kitchen and a plastic bag containing the cut-up remnants of the clothes he'd been wearing when they brought him in. The nurse who processed his discharge, A younger woman named Carla, who had clearly been keeping track, slid a paper bag across the counter along with the clipboard. "From the guys in the parking lot," she said. Ryan opened the bag. Clean clothes. His size, not approximately, not roughly, but actually his size, which meant someone had paid attention. Jeans, a dark gray t-shirt, socks still in the packaging, boots that were broken in just enough to be comfortable. At the bottom of the bag, a folded piece of paper. He opened it. Bobby Vance's handwriting, he'd learn later that it was Bobby, though he didn't know that yet, said, "We asked Carla what size. She guessed right. Good luck in there, kid. We'll be outside." Ryan stood at the discharge counter and read that note twice. Then he folded it and put it in the pocket of the new jeans and went to get changed. They were outside. Not 200 this time. Most of the chapter had lives to return to, responsibilities, the ongoing business of being the people they were. But there were 16 of them in the parking lot, and when Ryan came through the sliding doors, they turned toward him with the collective, unhurried attention of people who have decided that this specific moment deserves to be witnessed. Marcus was leaning against his bike. He straightened when he saw Ryan. "You eat anything this morning?" he asked. "Hospital eggs," Ryan said. "That doesn't count. Get on." He nodded toward a second bike Danny Ortiz's, Ryan would learn, borrowed for the occasion because Danny had decided that Ryan was riding out properly or not at all. "I'll take you to Evelyn's. She's been cooking since 6 this morning, which means she either burned something already or the food is going to be extraordinary. With her, it's usually one or the other." Ryan looked at the bike. He had never ridden a motorcycle in his life. "I don't know how to—" "You're riding passenger," Marcus said. "All you have to do is hold on and lean when I lean. You overthink it, you make it harder." He paused. Story of most things. Ryan looked at the 16 men watching him with the patient, open expressions of people who had decided their verdict and were waiting for him to catch up to it. He got on the bike. Evelyn's house was 10 minutes from the hospital and about 100 years from anything Ryan had imagined. Not large, modest, in fact, a single-story house with a kitchen that smelled like it had been doing serious work for several decades, but full in a way that had nothing to do with furniture. Full of evidence, photographs on the walls, a shelf of things that had been kept because they mattered. A dog named Walter, elderly and unbothered, who sniffed Ryan's hand, determined he was acceptable, and went back to sleep. Evelyn put a plate in front of him that could have fed 2 people and stood over him while he ate with the focused attention of someone monitoring a vital sign. "Eat the eggs first," she said. "You need protein before carbohydrates when you've been depleted." "How do you know about depleted?" "I raised Marcus," she said. "I know about depleted." Ryan ate the eggs. Michael was at the table with Lily in a high chair beside him. Lily was eating something orange sweet potato, Ryan would learn, and distributing it generously across her tray and her shirt, and at one point Michael's sleeve, which Michael accepted with the resignation of a man 3 years into toddler parenthood. There was a conversation happening around Ryan, easy overlapping the kind of conversation that happens in rooms where people know each other well enough to finish sentences, and at first he sat slightly outside it, the old instinct of the new person who hasn't yet been given permission to join. But slowly, without anyone making an announcement about it, the conversation folded around him. Evelyn asked him a question. Michael answered something to him directly. Lily pointed at his plate and said, "Dad," with the acquisitive interest of a toddler, and he gave her a small piece of toast, and Evelyn said, "She's going to love you forever now. That's all it takes with her." And the conversation kept moving. He was in it. He was just in it. He didn't know what to do with that. So he kept eating. Long. It was after lunch, when Evelyn was washing dishes and Michael had taken Lily for a nap, that Marcus came and found Ryan sitting on the back step with a cup of coffee he hadn't asked for, and Walter the dog leaning against his leg. Marcus sat beside him. For a while, neither of them said anything. It was the comfortable kind of nothing, or at least it was moving toward it. Then Marcus said, "I found out who they were, the men at the bar." Ryan looked at him. "Associates of a man named Garrett Solis. He runs a distribution operation out of Tucson, illegal, obviously. He and my chapter have been in a territorial dispute for about 8 months. He thought coming after my mother was leverage." Marcus said it flatly, the flatness of someone who has already done all the feeling about a thing and is now in the operational stage. He miscalculated. "Is he?" "That's being handled," Marcus said in a tone that closed the subject completely. That's not your concern. What is your concern? What I need you to hear is that those men knew who Evelyn was. They knew exactly what they were walking into, and they counted on the fact that she'd be alone. Ryan looked at his coffee. They almost weren't wrong, he said. No, Marcus agreed. They almost weren't. He paused. You understand what I'm saying? They planned it. They waited for the right night. They did their homework. He turned to look at Ryan directly. And the one thing they didn't account for, the one variable that wasn't in their calculation, was a homeless kid with no reason to be there and no weapon and no backup who came back anyway. Ryan said nothing. You broke their plan, Marcus said. Not because you were stronger, not because you were trained or armed or prepared, but because you were the one person on earth who made a choice they didn't predict, because you cared about something they didn't know existed. Ryan looked at his hands. She left food, he said, for the third time, because that was still somehow the truest way he had to say it. I know, Marcus said. She told me. She said she'd seen you outside in the parking lot the first time and she knew. He paused. She said, I knew that boy was good. Just like that. Not guessing, not hoping, knowing. Ryan's jaw tightened again. She was right, Marcus said simply. The weight of that being seen clearly by someone being known accurately and having what they saw confirmed rather than disappointed landed on Ryan Hale in a way he hadn't prepared for. It sat on his chest like something physical. Not bad, not painful exactly, just heavy in the way that things you've needed for a long time are heavy when they finally arrive. Marcus, he said, yeah, I don't know how to do this, any of this. I don't know how to be around people who. He stopped, tried again. I've been on my own for a long time, and I know how to do that. I'm good at that. I'm not sure I'm good at this. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then you think Hector Ruiz knew how to be part of something when he got out of Leavenworth? You think Bobby Vance walked into his first run knowing what he was doing? You think He stopped. We're all just people who were bad at something until we weren't. The only thing you need to know how to do right now is show up. You've already proven you can do that. Ryan almost said something. Then Walter the dog stood up from his position against Ryan's leg, turned around once, and lay back down with his head in Ryan's lap, deeply committed to this choice. Ryan looked down at the dog. Marcus watched him. Even Walter thinks you belong here, Marcus said, and Walter hates everybody. He doesn't seem like he hates everybody. He hates my son. Your son seems nice. He is nice. Walter doesn't care. Marcus shook his head. 19-year-old dog with opinions. My mother spoils him. He thinks he's a person. He paused. Maybe he is. Point is, he likes you, which carries weight in this house. Ryan laughed. It was a small laugh, not a big one, and it surprised him when it came out. Surprised him the way things surprise you when they emerge from a part of yourself you'd forgotten was still functioning. But it was real. It was actual. Marcus heard it and said nothing, and looked at the yard and allowed it to exist without making it into a moment, which was the right thing to do. And Ryan noted that Marcus was very good at knowing when to make things into moments and when to let them just be things. 3 days later, the second thing happened that Ryan hadn't planned for. He was at the Blue Barrel. Evelyn had asked him to help restock the back storage room, the kind of task that was simple and physical, and gave his body something to do while his mind continued its ongoing negotiation with the new reality of his life, when a car pulled up outside that he didn't recognize. Not a bike. A car, dark sedan out of state plates. 2 men got out who were not bikers and not local, and something in Ryan's threat assessment, which had not taken a day off since the night in the desert, went very quiet and very alert simultaneously. He watched through the kitchen porthole window. They went to the front door of the bar, knocked. Evelyn answered. Ryan couldn't hear the conversation, but he could read posture, and posture was a language he was fluent in. Evelyn's posture when she opened the door was open. Then it went very still. Then it closed, not hostile, but contained the posture of someone receiving information they weren't sure yet how to process. One of the men handed her something. She looked at it, looked at them, said something. They nodded. She closed the door. Ryan came out of the kitchen. Evelyn was standing in the middle of the bar with a business card in one hand and an expression on her face that was harder to read than anything he'd seen from her before. What was that? He asked. She looked up at him. They were looking for you, she said. The cold moved through him fast. Who were they? They said, she looked at the card again. They said they were from the Department of Children and Family Services, an administrative follow-up on your file. She paused. They said there was something in your case they needed to clarify about your mother. Ryan went completely still. My mother, he said. Not a question. The word itself was strange in his mouth, foreign like a word in a language he'd studied but never actually spoken. They left a number, Evelyn said. She held the card out. They said it was important, that she had... She stopped, chose her words, that she'd been trying to find you. The bar was quiet. Ryan looked at the card in Evelyn's hand. He thought about 6 words on a kitchen counter, about a car gone from a driveway, about 7 years of silence so complete he'd eventually stopped listening for the end of it and just accepted that it was what it was, that some doors didn't open again once they closed. He thought about what Marcus had said 3 days ago about voices that lie to you. He didn't take the card right away. Ryan, Evelyn said gently. I heard you, he said. She waited. He reached out and took the card. He looked at it for a long time, at the name and the number, at the small official logo in the corner that represented a system that had processed him and filed him and eventually released him with $40 and no roadmap. And underneath all of that, underneath the cold and the old anger and the practiced numbness, something moved. Something that was not numbness. Something that was very much the opposite. I need to think, he said. Okay, Evelyn said. I need... He stopped, looked at her. Can I... You can stay here as long as you need, she said, before he finished asking. Like she'd had the answer ready, he nodded. He walked back into the kitchen and sat down on a crate and held the card in both hands and breathed. Walter, who had somehow made his way from Evelyn's house to the bar in the manner of old dogs who go where they decide to go and explain nothing, came and pressed his gray muzzle against Ryan's knee. Ryan put his hand on the dog's head. Outside, he could hear Evelyn moving around the bar, the sounds of the place that had been the closest thing he'd had to a home for 4 months. The particular sounds of it, the creak of the cooler door, and the clink of glasses being arranged, and the distant hum of the refrigeration unit that Evelyn had been meaning to get service for 2 months. He was not alone. He was sitting in a room with evidence of his own existence in it, the crates he'd moved. The shelf he'd straightened, the small marks a person leaves on a place when they've been allowed to be in it long enough. He was not invisible. He looked at the card. He took a breath. And for the first time in a very long time, he let himself sit with the possibility that the story wasn't over, that it had more chapters, that chapters he'd thought were closed had maybe only been waiting for him to be in a place where he was strong enough, held enough, believed in enough to open them again. It was terrifying. It was also underneath the terror something else, something that felt a lot like being alive. He didn't call the number that day. He carried the business card in the front pocket of the new jeans Bobby Vance had picked out for him, and he went through the motions of the afternoon, restocking the bar, fixing a cabinet hinge. Evelyn had mentioned 3 times, and nobody had gotten to eating dinner at Evelyn's kitchen table with Marcus and Michael and Lily, who fell asleep in her high chair with a piece of bread still in her fist. He did all of it, and he was present for all of it, but underneath every moment there was a low, constant frequency, like a note held too long. There was the card in his pocket and the number on the card, and the sentence Evelyn had said she'd been trying to find you. 7 years of silence, and then she'd been trying to find you. He lay on the cot in the back room of the Blue Barrel. Evelyn had set it up without making an announcement about it, just told him the room was there and the key was on the hook. The same matter-of-fact generosity that characterized everything she did, and he looked at the ceiling and thought about his mother's face. The problem was that he couldn't remember it clearly anymore. He had a general impression, blonde hair lighter than his blue eyes, a particular way she had of tucking her chin when she was uncomfortable. But the details had softened over 7 years, the way photographs soften when they're handled too much. He could remember the smell of her perfume. He could remember the sound of her voice reading to him when he was very small before things got hard, the specific cadence of it. But her face was approximate now, a sketch rather than a photograph. And that loss, the loss of her face's precision, was its own specific grief, separate from everything else. He took the card out and looked at it in the dark. Sandra Poole had written family on his intake form, and nobody had questioned it. Evelyn left food behind a barn for a boy nobody else saw. Marcus Donovan pulled a chair to a hospital bed and said all of it if you were willing. Ryan Hale had been learning in small and painful installments over the past week that the people who showed up for you were the only definition of family that had ever actually meant anything. Blood was a fact. Presence was a choice. And choices he was beginning to understand were where the weight was. He put the card on the floor beside the cot. He closed his eyes. He did not sleep for a long time. You talk. In the morning, Marcus was sitting at Evelyn's kitchen table when Ryan came through the back door, and he had 2 coffees already poured, which meant he'd either been there a while or he'd known when Ryan would arrive. And with Marcus, it was probably both. Evelyn told me, Marcus said, no preamble, no warm-up. Ryan sat down and wrapped his hands around the coffee mug. I figured, he said. You don't have to do anything, Marcus said. You know that. Whatever's on that card, it's your call, all of it, every piece of it. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But, Ryan said. Marcus looked at him. No, but, he said. That was the whole sentence. Ryan believed him. That was the thing about Marcus. He said exactly what he meant. No hidden compartments, no agenda embedded in apparent generosity. It was disarming in a way Ryan's experience had not prepared him for, because every adult authority in his life had said one thing and meant something adjacent to it, and learning to read that gap had been a survival skill for so long that dealing with someone who had no gap was its own kind of disorientation. I want to call, Ryan said. I don't know why. It might be the worst decision I make. Might be, Marcus agreed. She left, Ryan said. She just left. No warning, no conversation. I came downstairs and she was gone. I was 11. I know. And whatever reason she had, whatever was going on with her, whatever I didn't know, that doesn't change what it did, what it started. He looked at his coffee. Because of that morning, I ended up on the street. Because of the street, I ended up here. And here is, he stopped, looked around the kitchen. Here is good. Here is the best thing that's happened to me. But the road to here was, he shook his head. A lot of people would have broken. You bent, Marcus said. That's different. Is it? A broken thing doesn't work anymore. A bent thing, Marcus shrugged. A bent thing is just a thing that knows where the pressure is. He drank his coffee. You know where the pressure was. That's not a flaw. That's a map. Ryan looked at him for a long moment. Then he took the card out of his pocket and laid it on the table between them. Will you sit here while I call? He asked. Marcus didn't answer immediately, and Ryan appreciated that too. Appreciated that he considered it genuinely rather than instantly reassuring. Yeah, Marcus said. I'll sit here. Ryan dialed. It rang 3 times. 4. And then a woman answered, not his mother, a caseworker, professional and efficient, who confirmed his identity, and then said carefully, Mr. Hale, we've been working on this case for about 8 months. Your mother submitted a formal inquiry through our office asking to be put in contact with you. A pause. She's currently residing in Flagstaff. She asked us to reach out. She said, another pause shorter. She said she understands if you don't want contact. She said to tell you she'd understand. Ryan's hand on the phone was completely still. Is she sick? He asked, because that was the first thing his mind went to. That this was the kind of reunion that only happens when a clock is running, when the biology of things creates the urgency that ordinary guilt cannot. She has some health challenges, the caseworker said, in the careful language of someone trained to transmit difficult information without triggering specific reactions. But that's not the primary reason for the inquiry. She said she's been trying to find you for 3 years. She said she used the word deserves. She said you deserve to know she's been looking. Ryan sat with that. 3 years. For 3 years, some part of the universe had been in motion around him without his knowing, and he'd been sleeping behind bars and eating sandwiches from paper bags and believing with the bone-deep certainty of the consistently abandoned that no one was looking. Can I have her number? He asked. He wrote it on the back of the card. He thanked the caseworker and hung up and put the phone on the table and looked at Marcus. Marcus looked back at him. She's been looking for 3 years, Ryan said. Marcus didn't say anything, just waited. I don't know what to do with that, Ryan said. You don't have to know right now, Marcus said. I'm angry, Ryan said, flat, honest. I'm even knowing she was looking, I'm angry. Because 3 years of looking doesn't fix 11 years old. It doesn't fix 14, 16, 18. It doesn't fix the Garcias or aging out or the $40. His voice was controlled, but the thing underneath it wasn't, and he wasn't trying to hide it, which Marcus noted. She doesn't get to be the person who found me just because she went looking. Not automatically. Not without. He stopped. Without what? Marcus asked. Ryan thought about it. Without me deciding, he said. It has to be my decision. Whether she gets to come back in, whether I open that door. She doesn't get to decide that just by knocking. Marcus nodded slowly. That's right, he said. That's exactly right. But I want to talk to her, Ryan said. And he sounded surprised by it, genuinely surprised, like the wanting had arrived without his permission. I hate that I want to, but I do. Wanting to isn't weakness, Marcus said. Feels like it. Feelings lie sometimes. Logic doesn't. Logic says you're 18 years old, you've been alone your entire life, and the one person on earth who is supposed to have built the foundation of your world walked off the job. Of course you want to talk to her. Of course you want to know why. Wanting to know why is not the same as forgiving. It's not the same as letting her back in. It's just, he stopped. It's just needing the story to make sense. Everybody needs that. Ryan picked up the phone. He looked at the number on the back of the card. He dialed. It rang once, and then a voice answered that he recognized immediately, recognized in the specific, involuntary way that some sounds bypass the brain entirely and go straight to somewhere older, in the 7 years, in the kitchen counter, in the $40, and all the careful architecture of not needing anyone collapsed in approximately 1 second. And Ryan Hale said in a voice he didn't recognize as his own mom. A sound came through the phone that he had no framework for. Not crying exactly, more like the sound a person makes when something they have been bracing against for years suddenly stops, and the bracing itself becomes the thing that hurts. Marcus stood up from the table quietly and walked to the other side of the kitchen and stood with his back to Ryan, giving him the only privacy a small room allows. And Ryan noticed that and was grateful for it in a way he couldn't have articulated. The call lasted 47 minutes. Her name was Carol Hale still, which surprised him. He'd assumed she would have changed it, moved away from the association. She was living in Flagstaff in a small apartment and working as a medical transcriptionist, which she'd trained for online. She had a dog named Pete. She said, "I'm sorry," so many times in the first 5 minutes that Ryan finally said, "Stop, just tell me what happened. I don't want apologies, I want the truth." And she stopped and told him the truth. The truth was complicated the way all true things are. She had been in the years of his early childhood, a person drowning in a marriage to a man who had taken pieces of her with the patient thoroughness of someone who had all the time in the world, and she had stayed too long and fought too hard, and one day had understood with complete clarity that she was about to disappear entirely, that another year would make her a person her son wouldn't recognize anyway. So she left, and she told herself she was going to come back for him, was going to get stable, get a job, get an apartment, and come back. And then the months did what months do and became a year, and the year became 2, and the shame of what she'd done calcified around her like concrete, until the idea of coming back felt not like a return, but like a confrontation she'd lost the right to demand. So she went further away instead. Not from him, she said she was always specific about this, always precise, but from herself, from the version of herself who had done that to her son. "I know," Ryan said when she'd finished. "I know you think it made sense. I believe that you believe that." He paused. "But I was 11, and I needed you, and you made a choice, and the choice had consequences that you didn't carry." "I did." Silence. "I know," she said. "Just that. No justification, no addendum, no reaching for the next thing to say. Just I know." Accepting, he had. It was the most useful thing she could have said. Ryan recognized that. "I'm not ready to see you," he said. "Not yet. Maybe not for a while." "Okay," she said, "but I'm not." He stopped, looked at the wall, at a calendar Evelyn had hung there, the kind with the photographs of desert landscapes, and the current month was circled in red because Evelyn circled everything that mattered. "I'm not saying never. I'm saying not yet." "That's more than I had this time yesterday," Carol said quietly. "That's more than I deserve." "Probably," Ryan said, not cruel, just honest. She made a sound that was almost a laugh, almost. You sound like a man, she said. You sound like someone who knows who he is. Ryan thought about that, about the past week, about Evelyn's kitchen and Marcus's coffee and Lily's hands on his face and Walter the dog's gray muzzle on his knee. I'm working on it, he said. They hung up without resolving anything, because some things don't resolve in 47 minutes, don't resolve in 47 years, just settle into a shape that is livable, even if it isn't clean. But when Ryan set the phone down on the table, the low, constant frequency from the night before was gone. Not replaced by something good, not yet just gone. Silence where the held note had been. Marcus turned around. He looked at Ryan. Ryan looked back. She's in Flagstaff, Ryan said. She's been looking for 3 years. She's got a dog named Pete. He paused. I told her not yet. Marcus nodded. How do you feel? He asked. Ryan thought about it seriously the way Marcus had taught him by example to think about serious questions. Lighter, he said, and also like someone just hit me with something large. Yeah, Marcus said. That's about right. Samarum. The thing about Hell's Angels chapters is that they operate for better and worse, like families, which means news travels fast and everyone has opinions. And the concept of a private matter is largely theoretical. By that afternoon, the story of Ryan's call had moved through at least 6 of the men without Ryan having told any of them, because Evelyn had mentioned it to Thomas with the innocent intention of keeping him informed, and Tomas had mentioned it to Bobby, and Bobby had a mouth the size of a highway. Ryan was restacking the supply room's shelves when Hector Ruiz appeared in the doorway. Hector was not a man who announced himself. He arrived, which was a different thing. Heard about the phone call, Hector said. Ryan looked at him. Word travels. Bobby, Drea, Hector said by way of complete explanation. Yeah. Hector was quiet for a moment. He looked at the shelves Ryan was stacking with the critical eye of a man who has opinions about shelf organization. Then he looked at Ryan. My mother left when I was 9, he said. Flat. No setup, no softening. Different situation. She didn't come looking. He paused. I used to think that made it cleaner. You know, no ambiguity, no decisions to make. She was gone. End of story. Ryan waited. Doesn't make it cleaner, Hector said. You just carry different stuff. He looked at his hands. Big hands scarred the hands of a man who'd made choices with them and lived with all of them. You said not yet. That was the right call. How do you know? Ryan asked. Because you said it without hating yourself for it, Hector said. If you'd said yes to make her feel better, you'd have known it was wrong the minute you hung up. If you'd said never, you'd have known that was wrong too. Not yet is the only honest answer when you don't know yet. He shrugged with the practiced economy of a very large man who has learned to contain himself. That's not a philosophy. That's just what's true. Ryan looked at him. You never talk this much, Ryan said. I talk when I have something to say, Hector said. He turned and looked at the doorway. Bobby talks when he has something to say, when he doesn't have something to say, when the silence lasts more than 30 seconds. Different people, different approaches. He looked back at Ryan. You're going to be okay, by the way. I know you don't believe that yet. But you're going to be okay. He left. Ryan stood in the supply room with a box of bar napkins in his hands and felt something he hadn't felt in years, something he couldn't immediately name, and then he named it witnessed. Not observed, not assessed, not processed through a system. Witnessed, seen by another person who had carried something similar and was telling him from the other side of it that the weight was survivable. He put the bar napkins on the shelf. He kept working. Ashaq. 4 days later, Marcus sat him down at the kitchen table with papers. Not legal papers, or not entirely. Alongside the employment agreement for the garage, Marcus ran on the north side of Maricopa, which was a legitimate business and a significant operation, and where Ryan would start on Monday at $7 above minimum wage doing inventory and general labor. While Marcus assessed where his actual skills were, there was also a folded piece of paper that wasn't part of any official document. What's this? Ryan asked. Read it, Marcus said. Ryan unfolded it. It was handwritten Marcus's handwriting, which was the handwriting of a man who'd learned it late and made it deliberate. 8 lines. Ryan read them twice. It was a list of names, 16 names with phone numbers next to each one. That's every man who was in that parking lot the night you were discharged, Marcus said. All 16 of them put their number on that list voluntarily. That means, he leaned forward slightly, That means any one of them, anytime for any reason. Flat tire at 2 in the morning. Someone giving you trouble. You need to talk and I'm not available. You're about to make a decision you're not sure about and you need another set of eyes. He paused. Any reason? No reason at all. You call, they answer. Ryan looked at the list. 16 names, 16 numbers, 16 men who had stood in a hospital parking lot through the night for a boy they'd never met and were now apparently continuing to stand there, in whatever way standing there meant in ordinary life. This is too much, Ryan said. His voice was careful. Marcus, this is... Ryan. Marcus's voice was firm but not hard. Stop. Stop calculating what you deserve. Stop measuring what you earned against what you're receiving. I've watched you do that for 2 weeks and I understand why you do it. You've had to keep that ledger your entire life to protect yourself, but you're in a different place now, and the ledger is working against you. He put both hands flat on the table. These men didn't put their numbers on that list because they feel sorry for you. They put their numbers on that list because you did something that meant something to them. You reminded them of something they needed reminding of. That matters to them. Let it. Ryan looked at the list. He folded it, put it in his pocket, next to where the business card had been. Okay, he said. Okay, he said again, more certain this time. Marcus sat back. Something settled in his face. Monday, he said, 7 a.m. Don't be late. Hector runs the morning shift, and he's got opinions about punctuality. He's got opinions about everything, Ryan said. He does, Marcus agreed. He's right about most of them. The rest, we just don't argue about. He stood. Evelyn wants you for dinner tonight. 6 o'clock. She's making the chicken. What chicken? Marcus looked at him with an expression of genuine reverence. You'll know when you taste it, he said. 2 hours before that dinner, Bobby Vance found Ryan sitting on the front step of the Blue Barrel and sat down next to him without being asked the way Bobby did everything without ceremony, without calculation, operating entirely on the logic of what seemed right to him in any given moment. You doing okay? Bobby asked. Better? Ryan said. Better's good, Bobby said. Better's the direction. They sat for a while. Bobby wasn't a comfortable silence person. He was the kind of man who filled silence the way weather fills a room naturally and without apparent effort, but he seemed to understand that Ryan needed something different, and he sat with it, which was its own kind of gift. Can I ask you something? Ryan said. Always. The night you all came back, when you found me. He looked at the ground. Marcus said something. Just son. Just that one word. I keep thinking about that. Bobby nodded slowly. He doesn't call people that, Ryan said. Does he? No, Bobby said. He doesn't. So why? Because that's what he saw, Bobby said simply. You were on the ground with his granddaughter in your arms, and he looked at you, and that's what he saw. A son. He paused. Marcus is a complicated man. He's done things and made choices and lived a life that isn't simple by any measure. But the one thing about him, the one absolute, is that he sees people clearly. Always has. It's the thing my mother would have called a gift if she'd met him. Bobby looked at Ryan sideways. He saw you clearly. You should believe what he saw. Ryan was quiet. He called me son and I passed out, Ryan said. Bobby laughed. Genuine warm, the laugh of a man who's found the exact right thing funny. That is a true statement, Bobby said. Not my best moment. Kid, you'd been stabbed. You'd carried a toddler through miles of desert. You'd stood down armed men with a piece of wood, and you'd been bleeding for what Tomas estimated was about 4 hours. Bobby shook his head. Passing out after all that isn't weakness. That's your body cashing the check after your soul wrote it. Ryan looked at him. That's a good line, Ryan said. I've been working on it for 2 weeks, Bobby said seriously. Glad it landed. Dinner at Evelyn's that night was as advertised the chicken. Ryan ate 3 servings and Evelyn watched with the deep satisfaction of a woman whose love language was feeding people and who had found in Ryan Hale someone who received that language with total fluency. Lily sat beside him at the table and stole pieces of his cornbread with brazen confidence, and he let her every time without pretending to defend it, and she seemed to regard this as the correct order of things. Michael told a story about something that had gone wrong at work involving a forklift and a pallet of bottled water that made everyone laugh. And Marcus told the story of the first time he tried to cook for Evelyn's birthday and set off the smoke alarm twice and still presented the result with complete confidence. And Evelyn said, "It was inedible, but he was so certain about it that I ate 2 bites." And Marcus said, "Confidence is half of cooking." And Evelyn said, "That is objectively false, and I've been trying to correct it for 30 years. Ryan sat in the middle of all of it and ate his chicken and watched these people, this family that was imperfect and complicated and loud and warm, in the specific reliable way of things that have been tested and held, and he felt something arriving in him that he identified slowly the way you identify something emerging from fog. It was not happiness, exactly. Happiness was too simple a word, and he was too honest a person to claim it for something this complicated. It was more like alignment, like a thing that had been slightly out of true for 18 years was being quietly, steadily, without announcement corrected. He was here. He was at a table. There was chicken. A 2-year-old was stealing his cornbread. The men whose numbers were in his pocket had decided without being asked that he was worth showing up for. His mother was in Flagstaff with a dog named Pete, and the door between them was not open, but it was no longer locked from both sides. And Marcus Donovan at the head of the table looked across at him and gave him one small nod, the nod of a man who is checking, who is confirming, who wants to make sure the thing he offered is landing, and Ryan gave it back. That was all. That was everything. Outside, the desert did what it always did, indifferent, vast, unbothered by the drama of human beings trying to find each other in the dark. But inside this kitchen, in the specific warmth of this table, Ryan Hale was not outside anymore. He was in, and for the first time in 7 years, he let himself believe that in was a place he was allowed to stay. Then Walter the dog put his head on Ryan's foot under the table, staking his claim, and Ryan looked down at him and thought, 18 years old, and this is what I had to do to get a dog to love me. He didn't say that out loud, but he almost smiled, and almost was for right now more than enough. Monday came the way important days always do, without announcing itself as important, arriving dressed as ordinary. Ryan was up at 5:30. Not because an alarm told him to, but because his body, which had spent 4 months calibrated to the rhythms of survival, get up before the heat, move before the foot traffic, stay ahead of the variables, had not yet learned how to sleep through a morning that had somewhere to be. He lay on the cot for about 3 minutes staring at the ceiling, and then he got up because lying still had never suited him, and it wasn't going to start today. He was at the garage at 6:45. Hector was already there. Of course Hector was already there. Hector looked at him when he walked in, looked at the clock on the wall, looked back at him, and said nothing, which from Hector Ryan was learning to read as approval. The garage was larger than Ryan had expected, 8 bays of parts room, the size of a small apartment, a front office where a woman named Greta ran the books with the organized ferocity of someone who had decided that chaos was a personal insult. The work was real work inventory, hauling, cleaning, and when Ryan demonstrated on day 2 that he understood the basic architecture of an engine, something he'd picked up from watching his father during the rare functional years, back when Dale Hale still went to the warehouse, Hector moved him to floor work without ceremony, the way Hector did all things. He was not fast yet, he was not polished, but he was precise and he was consistent and he showed up every day on time without being reminded, and in a world where those 3 things were rarer than people admitted they were enough to matter. Greta told him at the end of his first week, while handing him his pay envelope, "You're the only person Hector has not yelled at this month. I don't know what that means about you, but it means something." Ryan opened the envelope, looked at the number. It was more money than he had ever held in his life. He stood there for a moment, just holding it. "You okay?" Greta asked, watching him with the practical concern of a woman who'd seen all kinds of things come through that front office. "Yeah," Ryan said. He stopped. There was no clean way to finish the sentence that didn't require more context than the moment had room for. "Yeah, I'm good." He put the envelope in his pocket next to the folded paper with 16 names on it. He drove back to the Blue Barrel. Marcus had lent him an old truck that ran well if you didn't ask it to accelerate above 55, which Ryan didn't because he had nowhere to be in a hurry anymore, and he sat in the parking lot for a few minutes before going in. He had money. He had a place to sleep. He had work that mattered and people who showed up, and a 2-year-old who stole his cornbread and a 19-year-old dog who slept on his feet. He had a mother in Flagstaff he wasn't ready for yet and the space to not be ready. He had a number on the back of a card that he had not dialed again, but that he kept because keeping it was a decision too. A decision that said, I'm not finished with this story yet. I'm just not starting the next chapter today. He got out of the truck. He went inside. Evelyn was behind the bar. She was always behind the bar between 4 and 7, the pre-dinner stretch. She called her thinking time, though it involved a lot of actual bartending, and she looked up when he came in. Pay envelope, she said. First one, he said. She smiled. The real one, not the bar business one. Come here, she said. He walked to the bar. She reached under it and produced a plate she'd been keeping warm. He could tell by the way she moved it, the careful, flat-handed carry of someone managing heat, and set it in front of him. The chicken, in the middle of a Tuesday. Evelyn, he said, first paycheck deserves the chicken, she said, with the finality of someone who has decided this is simply a fact of the universe and is not entertaining counter-arguments. Sit down. He sat. He ate. She wiped down the bar and let the silence be comfortable the way she always did, the way that had been one of the first things he'd noticed about her, that she did not require noise to fill the space between people, that she understood silence as a form of company rather than an absence of it. I've been thinking, Ryan said between bites. Okay, she said. I want to pay rent for the back room. Evelyn stopped wiping the bar. Ryan, not a lot, he said quickly. I know the room isn't worth much, but I want to pay for it. I need to pay for it. He looked at her directly. I know what charity feels like, and I know what wages feel like, and I know the difference between them, and I need this to be wages. Not because I'm not grateful, because I am, but because he stopped, found the words Marcus had given him 2 weeks ago. Because I invest in things I'm paying for, and I want to invest in this. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Then she named a number. It was small, deliberately, obviously small, but it was a number, a real one. That's not enough, Ryan said. That's what the room is worth, Evelyn said in a tone that suggested the negotiation was over. Ryan looked at her. She looked back. You're as stubborn as your son, he said. My son learned it from me, she said. She went back to wiping the bar. First month's due on the 1st. You're 3 weeks early, so you've got time. He ate the rest of the chicken. 3 weeks later, the thing happened that Ryan had not seen coming, which was unusual because Ryan saw most things coming. It was a Saturday late afternoon and the bar was doing its pre-evening business, a handful of regulars, the low hum of a jukebox Evelyn had owned for 20 years and maintained with the devotion of someone tending a garden. Marcus came in, which was not unusual. But Marcus came in with the 12 men who'd been at the hospital that night, Bobby and Hector and Tomas and 9 others, and they arranged themselves around the bar with the specific deliberateness of people who have a plan they're not announcing yet. Ryan was doing a supply count in the back. He heard the voices and came through the kitchen door and stopped. 12 men looking at him. Marcus at the center. Ryan looked at Evelyn, who was behind the bar, with an expression of careful neutral, which he knew by now meant she was in on something. What is this? Ryan asked. Sit down, Marcus said. I'd rather stand. Ryan, Marcus's voice was patient. Sit down. He sat. Marcus reached inside his cut and produced something that he set on the bar between them. Ryan looked at it. It was a patch, not large, about 3 inches across, the kind that goes on the front of a cut rather than the back. It said simply Prospect. Ryan looked at the patch, looked at Marcus, looked at the 12 men arranged behind Marcus with the collective expression of people trying very hard not to reveal how they were feeling about this moment. That's not something you give someone, Ryan said carefully. That's something someone earns. Correct, Marcus said. I haven't earned it. Ryan, Marcus leaned on the bar. Let me explain something about how I see the last 3 weeks. You showed up Monday at 6:45 when you were told 7. You have not been late once. You learned the inventory system in 2 days when it takes most people 2 weeks. You asked Hector for feedback on day 3, which means you walked up to the most intimidating man in the building and said, tell me what I'm doing wrong, which takes either stupidity or courage. And you're not stupid. He paused. And you asked Evelyn to pay rent for a room that she would have given you free for the rest of her life because you needed to earn your place rather than be given it. He looked at him directly. That's not a person who hasn't earned something. That's a person who has been earning things his entire life without anyone marking it down. The bar was completely quiet. Ryan looked at the patch. I don't know your world, he said. Your rules, that's what prospect means. Bobby said from the back. It means you're learning. It means you're in the room while you figure it out. Nobody hands you the keys on day one, but they let you in the door. Ryan looked at Bobby. Bobby shrugged with the particular shrug of a man who has said the thing and is confident it was the right thing and doesn't need to elaborate. This is Ryan started. Don't say too much, Hector said. Flat, matter of form. You think too long about things like this, you talk yourself out of them. Some things you just have to say yes to. Ryan looked at Hector. Hector looked back at him without expression, which was as close as Hector got to encouragement. Ryan picked up the patch. He looked at it in his hand. He thought about the kitchen counter, the paper bag, the $40, the caseworker's form that said family, because a woman named Sandra Poole had written it down without question, and nobody had argued. He thought about Lily's hands on his face and a dog named Walter, who had decided without being asked that Ryan Hale's feet were the correct place to sleep. He thought about standing in the dark with his arms around someone else's child, his body between the headlights and the one thing that mattered, and the ground shaking in 200 engines. He thought about a man kneeling in the dirt and saying, son. He looked up. Yes, he said. The sound that went in through those 12 men was not loud. It wasn't whooping or celebrating. It was quieter than that, the sound of people exhaling something they had been holding, the collective release of men who don't often feel things publicly admitting, in the only way they knew how, that this moment mattered to them. Hector put out his hand. Ryan shook it. Bobby grabbed him by the back of the neck the way men do when words aren't the right tool, brief and firm. Thomas said, welcome to the worst decision you'll ever make that turns out to be the best one. Marcus said nothing. He just looked at Ryan with the steady, clear-eyed look of a man who has seen something through from where it started to where it arrived and is at peace with all the distance in between. Evelyn behind the bar poured drinks for everyone, and when she got to Ryan, she poured him a Coke because he was 18, and she had decided opinions about 18-year-olds and alcohol, regardless of the company he was keeping, and he took it without argument because she was right, and also because arguing with Evelyn Donovan was a project that no one had ever completed successfully. 6 weeks after that, on a Thursday morning in September, Ryan drove to Flagstaff. He didn't tell Marcus first. He told Evelyn because he'd learned that Evelyn was the right person to tell things to when you needed someone who would neither talk you out of it nor hype you into it, who would just hear it and say, okay, and trust you. Okay, Evelyn said. He drove 3.5 hours and parked outside an apartment building and sat in the truck for 20 minutes. He was not ready. He had concluded over the past 2 months that he was never going to be ready. That readiness was not the threshold for this particular door, that the threshold was just deciding that the not knowing was worse than the knowing, and that the only way to have the information was to go get it. He got out of the truck. She answered the door on the second knock. Carol Hale was 51 years old and looked like someone who had been through something and was still in the process of coming out the other side. She had his eyes. He hadn't known, that hadn't remembered it, but looking at her now, he saw it immediately. The same shape, the same color, the same particular quality of attention that had apparently been handed down without anyone asking his permission. She looked at him and pressed both hands over her mouth. He looked at her and felt 18 things simultaneously and sorted through them and pulled out the one that was truest. I'm not here to fix anything, he said, and I'm not here to be fixed. I needed to see you so I could decide what's next. She nodded. Her eyes were full. Can I come in? He said. She stepped back. He went in. A small dog rushed his feet immediately. Pete Tan and ridiculous communicating via full-body enthusiasm that Ryan was the most important arrival in the history of arrivals. Ryan looked at the dog. Despite everything, despite the weight of the room and the woman across from it, and the 7 years and the kitchen counter, and all of it, he almost laughed. Because of course there was a dog. He crouched down and let Pete climb his knees and thought you can do hard things in the company of a dog. The dog doesn't know it's hard. The dog just knows you're there. He sat across from his mother in her small living room and they talked for 2 hours, and it was painful and incomplete and necessary, all three at once, in the way of things that had been delayed so long they arrived with compounded interest. He did not forgive her that afternoon. He was honest about that, said it plainly without anger, but without softening. I'm not there yet. Maybe I get there, I don't know. But I needed you to be a person to me instead of a story, and now you are, and I'll figure out the rest. She said, that's all I'm asking for. just to be a person to you. He drove home in the dark. 3.5 hours, the desert on either side, Pete's face already fading in his memory. But the weight of the afternoon settling into something he could carry, not comfortable, not resolved, but known. Mapped. He knew where the edges were now. He could navigate. He got back to Maricopa at 10:30, and there was a light on in the Blue Barrel, which meant Evelyn was still there. He went in. She looked up. "How'd it go?" she asked. He sat down at the bar. "Hard," he said. "Necessary, not done." He looked at her. "I think it's going to be a long process." "Most true things are," she said. "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment. "She has his eyes." "Who's Pete, the dog?" He paused. "I have her eyes. Pete has his own eyes. But the dog was he made it easier, stupid as that sounds." "It doesn't sound stupid," Evelyn said. She slid a Coke across the bar. "Dogs know when a room needs them." He drank his Coke. The bar was quiet in the way it got late on Thursday nights, not empty quiet, but settled quiet. The quiet of a place that has been many things over many hours and is now just itself. "Evelyn," he said, "Thank you for the food, the sandwiches, the paper bags." He looked at her. "Before everything, before any of it, you saw me when I was," he stopped. "You made me exist. When I was invisible, you made me real." Evelyn Donovan put both hands flat on the bar and looked at this boy, this man really 18 years old, and already made of more than most people twice his age, and she said very simply, "You were never invisible to me. Not for one day." He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Ushaim. The following Saturday, Lily turned 3 years old. The party was at Evelyn's house because all things happened at Evelyn's house, and there were people everywhere, bikers with faces like geography holding paper plates with cake on them, children running through rooms, Michael trying to manage the candles in the specific way of fathers who have decided that birthday candles are a project requiring full project management. Greta from the garage talking to Bobby Vance about something that had them both laughing too hard to stand up straight. Marcus found Ryan in the kitchen eating a piece of cake by the counter and stood next to him. "Good party," Ryan said. "Evelyn doesn't do bad parties," Marcus said. "It's not possible for her." They ate their cake. "I went to Flagstaff Thursday," Ryan has said. Marcus nodded. Evelyn mentioned, "It was hard." "Yeah, but I went." "Yeah," Marcus said. "You did." From the other room, Lily's voice clear and sovereign. Ryan, come." Marcus looked at Ryan. Ryan looked at the doorway. "She does that a lot," Marcus said. "You've noticed." "I've noticed," Ryan said. He set down his plate. "You should go," Marcus said. Ryan went. Lily was standing beside the birthday cake with the expression of a child who has decided that all of this is hers and she would like Ryan specifically to witness her claiming of it. She grabbed his hand when he got close with both of hers, the proprietary grip of someone who has decided that this person belongs in this moment. "Watch," she said. Michael lit the candles. Everyone gathered. Everyone sang. Ryan stood at the edge of the circle with Lily's hand in his and watched the candlelight move on her face and felt the song happen around him, imperfect and slightly off-key in places, and completely, utterly real, and understood in the specific and wordless way of things that don't require language, that this was what he had been walking toward. Not across the desert that night, not toward the hospital or the bar or the garage or the truck. This table, these people, this child with both hands around his and the complete unquestioning confidence that he belonged beside her. Lily blew out her candles. Everyone cheered. She turned and looked up at Ryan with the serious, assessing expression she reserved for things that mattered to her. "Ryan, stay," she said. He looked at her. This small person who had decided somewhere in the darkness of the worst night of her life that he was safe, who had pressed her face into his shoulder and held on and trusted him with everything she had because she had no other option, and he had turned out to be trustworthy, and she had never forgotten it. He crouched down to her level. "Ryan stays," he said. She nodded, satisfied, the nod of someone who had already known this but required the confirmation anyway. Then she turned back to the cake with the complete focus of a 3-year-old who has gotten what she needed and is ready to move on to the next thing, which was cake. Ryan stood up. Marcus was watching from across the room. Not smiling exactly, it wasn't a smiling expression, it was something deeper than that, something that lived below the surface of expressions in the place where men keep the things they actually feel. He gave Ryan the small nod, the one from the hospital bed. I see you. I confirm what I see. Ryan gave it back. He stayed for the rest of the party. He ate 2 more pieces of cake. He talked to Greta and Bobby and held the door for Tomas, who was carrying a stack of folding chairs, and let Lily fall asleep against his arm on the couch at 7:30, her mouth slightly open. Her birthday crown tilted, her fist still loosely curled around the ribbon from one of her presents. He didn't move. He let her sleep. He sat there in Evelyn Donovan's living room, surrounded by the noise and warmth of people who had decided he was theirs. And he thought about an 18-year-old kid sleeping behind a bar 4 months ago who would not have been able to imagine this room, these people, go, this weight on his arm. That was the best weight he had ever felt. That kid had been real. That kid's hunger and fear and grief had been real. None of it was erased, and none of it needed to be. It was in him. It was the map Marcus had talked about. It was every piece of the road that had brought him here, and here was worth all of it. Ryan Hale, 18 years old, had started with nothing, and then one woman had left food in a paper bag, and nothing had stayed nothing after that. He looked at Lily sleeping. He looked at the room. He stayed.